Hi, my name is Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. This is my March wrap up. So in March I thought I would do the same as what I did in February, which is wrap up books as I finish them throughout the month. So today is the 4th of March and I have finished 2 books. The first of those books is probably my most highly anticipated release of 2022, and that is The Couple at the Table by Sophie Hannah. Sophie Hannah is one of my favourite crime writers. She writes standalones, she writes new Poirot novels, and she also has a detective series, the Culver Valley series, and this is a new book in that series. It's been a few years since we've had a book in this series, and although I do like all of Sophie Hannah's different types of books that she writes, this series is, I think, my favourite of hers. So, I've been looking forward to reading this since I first heard about the sort of central premise, which was probably a good year ago. So the book is set in a fancy, posh holiday resort in the UK, and there are a number of guests there, and someone, unsurprisingly, is murdered. And as with pretty much all of Sophie Hannah's novels, the murder is seemingly impossible because most of the other guests were all together at the same time that the murder took place. The one other person who was present in the room, forensics showed that they couldn't have done it, and other evidence like CCTV evidence and so on shows that it couldn't be an outsider who's come onto the premises. So how on earth did this murder happen? The book features Charlie Zayler and Simon Waterhouse, who are the two sort of main police characters that Sophie Hannah writes about. They're really quite interesting characters, quite different to the normal sort of police detectives that you get. We have chapters told in third person from their point of view, and we also have chapters told in first person by a character called Lucy, who is one of the guests at the resort. That's commonly how Sophie Hannah writes her books. She normally has a first person narrative from one of the characters, and then third person from police. There are lots of sort of other seemingly insignificant details, but which are really puzzling, which add to the overall sort of air of intrigue of the book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I just feel like I am in safe hands with Sophie Hannah. The title, The Couple at the Table, comes from the fact that the murder victim has, like the day before or something, received these anonymous threats, these notes, which tell her to beware the couple at the table next to yours. But that doesn't make sense because the dining area where the tables are outside, none of the tables are nearer to each other than any of the others. They all have more than one table which is the same distance to them. So to say beware the couple at the table nearest to yours makes no sense. So that's another sort of puzzling element to the story. This, I would say, has some Christie-esque aspects to it. So such as the setup of it's a closed circle mystery. We've got a number of guests, a number of characters all in this sort of small area. It's got quite a sort of a tight focus, and there are some other sort of narrative aspects of the story as it unfolds which are quite Christie-esque. Whether that's influenced by Sophie Hannah writing the new Poirot books. I'd say this is not as dark as some of the earlier books in the series, I don't think. In particular, one of her earlier books called Hurting Distance. If you want to read something that is messed up, that book is messed up. Like, it's really good, but it's messed up. But I feel like this has more of almost a lighter Christie-esque vibe. It has a map. I love a map in a mystery book. I don't know if you'll be able to see this because it's like a hand-drawn one. So we've got like a map of the resort, so we can see like the different chalets where people were staying and the setup of the dining area and where the body was found and so on and so forth. I will say that some of the reveals as they come, and there are a number of different reveals because there are a number of sort of smaller puzzles going on in here, but some of the reveals were a little bit like, does that really make sense? But I love Sophie Hannah so much that didn't really actually matter to me. Overall, I really enjoyed it. It was just such an enjoyable read. And then the second book that I finished so far, I finished this one last night. And this is Mrs. Death by Selena Godden. So I read this with my reading group at the library, and this was my pick. I've wanted to read this since I first heard about it. I think early last year it came out. But when I saw that the library group had a set of, like a reading group set of this book, I thought I would save it and wait to read it with the group. So, this is a very unusual book, which is going to be hard to describe. It looks like a longer book than what it actually is. It's told in a number of different forms. So, there is poetry in here. Hence why, you know, when you have the poem sections, there's not that many words on a page. There's some that's told in prose, there's some that's told in sort of like an interview transcript style. So this is about Mrs. Death, who is an older black working class woman. And the other central character we have is Wolf. And it's about the relationship between Mrs. Death and Wolf. There are lots of musings on death and life, and there are, at certain points, it felt a little bit like it was dancing around, reading a bit like those inspirational quotes that people share on social media, which are a bit, but it veered away from that, but it was almost a bit Paulo Coelho-esque, if you know what I mean. It took me a little bit to get into. It took me probably just over half the book before I was properly like, yeah, okay, I'm in here now. It jumps around quite a lot. It's difficult to describe because there isn't necessarily a typically just cohesive narrative. It's about a lot of different things, but without being confusing or overly complicated. There was one bit that I found quite hard to read, and it was only like a couple of pages long, but it was about the Moors murderers, and importantly, the victims. There's an afterword to this book, which I won't go into detail about, but was really lovely and quite touching. Selena Godden is a poet. I believe this is her first novel. And obviously, I mean, you can tell she's a poet, not only because parts of the book are told in poem format, but just because of all the writing throughout has a very lyrical, sort of rhythmic feel to it. We haven't met, the reading group, we haven't met yet. As I'm filming this anyway, we're due to meet next weekend. And I'm interested to see what other people think. I know one person read maybe a few pages at the most and has given up on it, which is fine because the first rule of book club is you actually don't have to read the book if you don't want to, so that's okay. But I am interested to see if anyone is going to finish it and whether they're going to like it or not. I overall did really like it. And I think if anyone finishes it, there's one or two who I think might finish it. I think a lot of people are probably not going to get on with the sort of unusual form. I think if they finish it, I think they might like it. But I am interested to see what they think when we meet. If I remember, I'll do you a little update next week after the group and let you know what other people thought. Today is Monday, the 7th of March, and I finished 2 more books over the weekend. So the first book that I finished was Small Things Like These by Keegan. This is a very short book. It's only about 100 pages long. It's set in Ireland in 1985, and we follow Bill, who works as a coal and timber merchant. He lives with his family, so his wife and his children. He's got several daughters. We see their day-to-day life. So we see Bill and his wife reflecting on the fact that they don't have a lot, but they do have more than what some other people have. The style of writing reminded me very much of Maeve Binchy, not only because it's set in Ireland, but because just the voice of the novel, the storytelling style, to me was very similar to Maeve Binchy's style, which is no bad thing because I really like Maeve Binchy. But if you'd have told me this was a story written by Maeve Binchy, I would absolutely have believed you. And in the village where they live, there is a convent, which there are rumours that the convent is a place where young unmarried women go when they're pregnant. And we see, and this plays sort of a part in the story and where it goes. I won't say too much about that. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very impactful for such a, I think it's an interesting choice when an author chooses to write a story in this way that is so short rather than making it into a full length novel. I think it has a lot of impact. I think it's not quite sparseness, but the sort of, there's a quietness to the story and how it's told, which I think amplifies what's actually happening in the story, if that makes sense. But no, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great, really engaging little read, and I would highly recommend it. And then the second book that I finished over the weekend is A Fatal Crossing by Tom Hindle. So this is a recent release. It's a murder mystery. It is described as being for fans of Agatha Christie. It is set on a ship which is sailing from Southampton to New York in 1924. And on the ship there's about 2,000 passengers, and obviously what happens is someone dies. So is it an accident or could it have been murder? On the ship there is a police officer who happens to be travelling, who wants obviously to investigate what's happened, the circumstances around this death. The captain of the ship says that the police officer can only investigate if he allows one of his crew members to be with him in his interviews with people, because the captain doesn't want the passengers to become panicked. So the police officer eventually agrees to this. So we have the police officer and this crew member who are interviewing, witnesses and trying to figure out what's happened. So we have a little bit of it's a bit of a Holmes and Watson, Poirot and Hastings sort of duo in a way. For me, this is a long book. This is over 400 pages long. And I think it's a bit too long for what it is. I also think it could do with being a little bit more fast paced. This is a debut novel. I liked it, but it was okay at best. I felt like I didn't have a clear picture in my mind of the different suspects. And this may have just been me, but it meant that I couldn't really sort of come up with any theories for myself as to who I thought did it or what had happened. And so it meant that when the reveal came, I was slightly underwhelmed by it. There was some stuff around where things went that did surprise me. But yeah, it was okay at best. I'm pretty sure this is going to be the first in a series, and I'm saying that because there are certain narrative strands around some of the main characters, which I think are being set up for a series. The central mystery and murder and stuff in the book is resolved in the book, but yeah, it's definitely being set up for a series, I would say. Will I read the next in the series? Possibly. I think if it's an interesting premise, I might pick it up, but I might not. So today is Saturday the 12th of March, and I have finished another book, but before I tell you about that, I want to tell you about my reading group this morning at the library. So last month we read Selena Godden's Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death, which you, I think, have seen me talk about a couple of minutes ago. So there were 7 of us at the group this morning, which is everybody. It's very unusual for us all to be there. Out of the 7 of us, it was only me that had read the book, which is fine, and expected really, because I didn't think anyone would get on with it. So I told them a bit about the book and stuff, and we had a good conversation about it, and then obviously we talked about lots of other things like we always do. But yeah, interesting that no one else got on with the book, whereas I really liked it, and that's fine, we have different tastes. While I was at the library, I picked up some Women's Prize books, and I have a few more winging their way to me as well. But the book that I finished about an hour ago is The House of Footsteps by Matthew West. This is a debut novel, and it's about, our main character is called, what's his name? Simon, and he works for an auction house, cataloguing works of art, and he's invited to go and stay at this big old manor house, Mordrake Manor, to catalogue their vast art collection. So he's an outsider to this small town where the house is. He gets to know the master of the house, who is a somewhat mysterious character. There are various servants in the house, some of whom are also somewhat mysterious. He hears from the townsfolk various rumours about the past, the house's history, rumours that the master of the house had a wife who died. It's quite a gothic book, where it's quite mysterious, intriguing. It has a flavour of Daphne du Maurier, I would say. I enjoyed it. It was a really good read. I would recommend it. I do have some questions on having finished the book, however. But nevertheless, I really enjoyed it. And I'd be interested to see what Matthew West comes out with next. Hi, it's the 16th of March and I finished 2 more books. So at the weekend I finished Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson. This is a novel that was first published in 1980. It's fairly short, it's around 200 pages long, but it took me a little bit to get through. We follow 2 sisters, Ruth and Lucille. The story is told from Ruth's point of view. They are orphans, and at the start of the book we see them being sort of passed between relatives while it's sort of being decided who they are going to live with. So they start off with first, I think, their grandmother, then a couple of other relatives, and they end up with their aunt Sylvie, which is who they are with for the majority of the novel. It's a fairly quiet book. Stuff does happen, but it's not overly plotty. It is very well written. It's really about the relationships between the 3 of them and how they fit in to the small town where they live in America. This is, according to The Observer, one of the 100 greatest novels of all time. It's a very sort of highly regarded and respected book. I think for me, I didn't quite get it. I didn't quite connect to the story. I don't feel like I've really taken anything from it. It's not a bad book by any means. It is really well written, but I'm just not sure that I totally connected with it. And then this morning I finished They Both Die at the End by Silvera. So this is a YA novel which I have been meaning to read for some time now. I really liked it. We follow two main characters, Matteo and Rufus. In the world where they live in the novel, there is this organisation called Deathcast, and Deathcast will call you up in the morning of the day that you're due to die. They'll call you up at about between like midnight and 1 a.m. and tell you that today is your end day. You will die today. They can't tell you how you're going to die, and they can't tell you exactly what time you will die, just that you will die on that day. And the people who call you up, it's just like a call centre basically. They'll call you up, they'll tell you that you're going to die that day. They'll, pass on their condolences. They'll tell you what the weather's going to be like. They'll suggest some things that you might like to do on that day. There are different sort of amusements and activity centres set up where aimed at people who are spending their end day. So Matteo and Rufus, our two main characters, are strangers. They don't know each other, and they both get a call on the same day to say that it is their end day. They will die today. There is an app called Last Friend, and on Last Friend you can go on there and you can meet up with other people who are a bit awesome on their end day. So Matteo and Rufus meet each other via this app. They meet up in real life and they decide to spend their end day together. It kind of, in a sense, it's a bit like watching an episode of Casualty, in the sense that you know that obviously they're both going to die. It's just a case of how and when that's going to happen. Matteo is quite a cautious person. His instinct is to stay at home, in his home, not go out, even though he knows that's not going to prevent him from dying. Whereas Rufus is kind of the opposite of that, and we see how their relationship develops through the course of the day in this novel. I really liked it. I liked the musings on mortality and fate. And it was quite touching, and it actually made me shed a little tear towards the end, so I would recommend this book. Hi, it's Friday the 18th of March, and yesterday I finished reading Cassam on the Pigeons by Agatha Christie. So this was a reread for me. I've read it several times before, but not for many years. This is a Poirot novel, and it's set in a prestigious girls' school in England. The book opens at the start of summer term, and we see the teachers arriving and the pupils arriving at the school. And obviously, before too long, one of the teachers is murdered. Poirot, strangely, does not make an appearance in this book until gone 200 pages, which is really weird, because Poirot is almost like a side character in the book, so there was not enough Poirot for my liking. It was an enjoyable read though. As I say, I have read it before, and I could remember some of the reveals as things become apparent, but I could not remember who done it, so that was still a surprise to me, and it probably will be when I next read it in years to come. It's not one of my favourite Poirots. I think partly because of Poirot's absence. Also, it's kind of got a bit of a slow start, I think. It takes a little bit of time to get into it as we are getting introduced to all the characters at the school. And there are some other sort of side plots which are not my favourite thing. But I won't give any spoilers. But no, enjoyable read. Hello, today is Friday the 25th of March, and I've got a few books to catch you up on. So first of all, I finished reading The Seeds of Time by John Wyndham, which is a short story collection. The stories covered things like aliens, space, time travel, robots. There was only one story in the collection that I didn't like, but I very much enjoyed all the others. I quite like John Wyndham's writing. I've not read him for a while, but I feel like he has some interesting ideas. I'm not a big sci-fi reader, so I don't know about these things, but I quite like his stuff. Then I read Careless by Kirsty. So this is a debut novel which has just been longlisted for this year's Women's Prize. Kirsty, interestingly, was a student of Bernardine Evaristo. Bernardine supervised Kirsty for her PhD, which was around female-centric care narratives in contemporary fiction. So this book is set in the late 90s, and we follow Bess, who is 15 years old, and at the start of the book she finds out that she is pregnant. She lives with her foster parents and her sister. She feels like she doesn't really have anyone to talk to. She can't talk to her foster parents. She has a social worker who she doesn't feel she can talk to. The one person she can talk to is her best friend Eshal, who their relationship, their friendship was one of my favourite things about this book. And there's a lot of great things about this book, but the relationship between Bess and Eshal was lovely. I thought it was so well written. So we see Bess as she has become pregnant, figuring out what she's going to do, who she can tell. We see Bess's experience of living with her foster parents. So her sister is the biological child of the parents, and we see how Bess is treated differently to her sister in many ways. We see her parents collecting receipts because they can claim lots of things back from social services, and Bess sort of sees herself as part of like a bigger transaction for that reason. In Bess's mind, because she is fostered and she's been with these foster parents for a number of years, but because she is fostered, she feels like she's only ever one step away from her parents throwing her out, putting her back into the system. I mean, she is still part of the system, and there's a lot of discussion about that in the book, in terms of the reasons why she continues to be fostered. She's never been adopted. We see how she's had a number of different social workers over the years. There's a discussion as well around the language that we use to talk about this, and I think the correct term is probably care experienced people, because it says in the back, Kirsty Capes is an advocate for better representation for care experienced people in the media, and that was something I wasn't aware of before going into the book. There is quite a lot going on in the book. It never feels like too much, but for example, Eshal, who's Bess's best friend, she has some stuff going on of her own. Her family are potentially trying to arrange a marriage for her, which she doesn't want. There are some quite dark parts of this book, really quite dark. So I would advise you to check for trigger warnings online if you think there might be, if there's anything that you might be triggered by, because there is an awful lot going on in here. As I say, it never feels like too much, but it does look at an awful lot of stuff. It's a very frank book. It talks about things which I have not very often read about before. I can absolutely see why this has been longlisted for the Women's Prize. I think it's a great book. I would highly recommend it. I think you should definitely read this book. I think it's a really important book because of what it's doing, the things that it is talking about and what it's saying. I've not read anything quite like this before, and I would definitely highly recommend it. And then the next book that I read this week was Your House Will Pay by Steph. So this is a book I've been meaning to read for a while, and I'm pleased that I finally got around to reading it. It is set in LA, and we have two narrative perspectives. So we hear from Sean. Sean is a black man who is in his 30s-ish maybe. He lives with his long-term girlfriend and her child. His cousin, Ray, has recently been released from prison. He was in prison for quite some time. Sean himself in the past has been sort of in and out of trouble, but is living a fairly settled life now. We see we find out about the trauma that his family has experienced in the past. And then our other perspective is from Grace, who is a second generation Korean American whose family own a pharmacy, and Grace works as a pharmacist. Grace has a sister called Miriam, but Miriam has been estranged from her parents for a number of years. Grace still keeps in intermittent contact with Miriam, but Grace doesn't really understand the reason for the estrangement, and as we go through we find out about more of the backstory and what has caused that to take place. I thought this was a really good book. It touches on themes of racism and prejudice, violence, grief and trauma and guilt. As the story goes on, we see what links these two families, and we do get some flashbacks as well to LA in the early 90s when riots were taking place. If you like thrillers with depth, then I would recommend this one. Today is the 27th of March, and yesterday I finished reading Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. So this is a book that I was very much looking forward to reading because I've heard so many people say so many great things about this book. And it did not disappoint. This is my second 5-star read of the year. So in this book we follow a married couple, Miri and Leah. Leah has just returned from a deep sea mission. The mission is for research purposes to look into, I think, life under the ocean. Something has gone wrong with the mission and it has gone on for longer than intended. But Leah does eventually return to her wife, and Miri is obviously very, very happy to have Leah back home. However, she feels like Leah is somehow different. She is sort of distanced from Miri, and Miri can't work out why or what's going on. We get flashbacks from Miri's point of view to earlier on in their relationship when things were good, how they met and so on, and we also have flashbacks from Leah's perspective from her time on this deep sea mission, and we see as we go through leading up to the point where things go wrong, we find out a bit more about that as we go through the story. I'm not going to give any spoilers. I really liked the way the book went. I think it's very gothic. It has horror elements to it, but in almost a quietly unsettling way rather than out and out horror, which in some ways is even more unnerving. It's a love story as well between Miri and Leah, and it was really, really like a lovely story. I would highly recommend this book. I think it's fabulous. According to Sarah Waters, whose opinion we trust, it's a wonderful novel, deeply romantic and fabulously strange. It is quite strange, but not like, again, almost quietly strange, not like in your face strange. It just sort of like creeps upon you as you're going along. But it's excellent. It's fabulous. Highly recommend. It's the 1st of April and I've got 2 final books to update you on. So first of all is 9 Lives by Peter Swanson. Peter Swanson is an author whose books I generally get out of the library as soon as they come out, although I do have a bit of a hit and miss relationship with him. Some of his books I've really liked and some I've been less than keen on. This one was okay, it was fine, it was an enjoyable read. It's an interesting premise in that 9 strangers all receive the same list, and on this list is a list of those 9 people's names. So you'll receive the list, your name's on there, and 8 other names of people who you have no idea who they are. And obviously one by one these people start to die. It is a premise that's been done many times before, and you know the author is clearly well aware of that. Throughout the book it references And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, even though really I'm not sure how similar it is, because obviously And Then There Were None, you've got a group of strangers who are together on an island, and one by one they get killed. Whereas here, the people are not physically in the same location, they're like all over the place. So it's sort of, even though there are kind of some similarities, it's not that similar to And Then There Were None, as it would have you believe. It's referenced at the front as being an homage to the golden age of mystery. I don't think it is at all really, other than that vague reference to And Then They Were None. Nothing else about this says Golden Age to me. Nevertheless, it was enjoyable. I had a good time with it. The reveal when it came was, I thought, fairly underwhelming, and I think whatever the reveal would have turned out to be, I would have found underwhelming, because I didn't feel that invested in the characters. I didn't have that much of an idea myself about what I thought had happened. I just wasn't that into it. So the ending sort of fell a little bit flat, but I still enjoyed it. I still had a good time with it, even though it is, I think, fairly forgettable. What I will say is Peter Swanson, he kind of spoils part of And Then They Went On in this book, and there's another Agatha Christie book which he spoils, and I don't know why he does this. He loves spoiling books. Randomly, he spoils part of the ABC murders, even though that, if you've read that book, it's not, you know, it's not the same. So that's not a spoiler for what happens in this book. Just randomly, partway through the book, he decides to spoil the ABC murders. I've read that book, so it's fine. But he loves spoiling books. Why does he do this? But anyway, an enjoyable read. And then the final book that I have read in March is The Passing Playbook by Isaac Fitzsimmons. So this is a YA novel. I heard about this on Jack's channel, Jack from Jthbooks. I'll link his channel down below. He's quite a new booktuber, and I've been getting lots of great LGBTQ recommendations from him. So this is great. So in this book we follow Spencer, who is 15 years old. He is a trans lad, and at the start of the book he's just moved school. He was being bullied at his previous school. When he starts at his new school, he doesn't want the other pupils or teachers to know that he is trans. He is really into soccer, and he wants to join the boys' soccer team. His parents, although they are in many ways very supportive of Spencer, they are concerned about him joining the boys' soccer team, and they don't want him to do that. They're trying to protect him, but he really wants to join, so he goes behind his parents' back and joins the soccer team. On the soccer team, he meets this other lad called Justice, and they like each other. So in part, the book is a romance. There is so much great representation in here. There's another character who is non-binary. Spencer's little brother is autistic. Spencer's parents, I think his father's black, his mother's white. Justice's family are very, very religious, and they don't know that Justice is gay. So there is, it sounds like there's quite a lot of stuff going on here, but it's never too much. It's done in a really, really great way. So obviously themes in here of gender, sexuality. There's a lot about allyship and the difference between real allyship and sort of performative allyship. I thought this was a really, really wonderful book. I would highly recommend it. I think, you know, I love reading YA books which just wouldn't have existed when I was growing up. So yeah, this was a really great read. So that's all the books that I read in March. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them. Let me know what your favourite book that you read in March was. I hope you're all doing well, and I'll speak to you all again very soon. Bye.